Okay, let's get into it. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the source material we have on one of the truly unique funk bands ever,
Mm.
the Ohio Players.
Yeah, legendary status, definitely.
Absolutely. And just a heads up before we start, the information we're looking at today comes mainly from online sources like MW One Stop's Music, Movies, and Sport.
Mhm.
So, while we're sticking to what these sources say for our dive, it's
Mm.
always good to remember online info can sometimes be a bit mixed in terms of accuracy.
Good point. But based on these sources, what's really striking about the Ohio Players is they weren't just a band. They were creating this whole artistic package.
Totally. Pushing boundaries, not just musically, but visually too, big time.
Yeah, dramatically so.
They came out of Dayton, Ohio, which is kind of amazing in itself, this funk hotbed. And they really helped shape the whole vibe of the 70s.
That style.
Exactly. Infectious grooves, yeah, the wild stage outfits, and of course those album covers that, well, they definitely made you look twice.
Or maybe hide them from your parents.
Probably. So our mission here really is to pull out the key stuff, the important bits from the material you've shared. Think of it as like your quick guide to getting up to speed on this really iconic group.
Yeah, cutting through to what matters. There's some surprising details in here, too.
Definitely. Okay, so let's rewind. Where does this story actually start according to the sources?
Well, like a lot of bands, they didn't start as the Ohio Players. The roots go way back to the late 50s. They were initially a backing band called the Ohio Untouchables.
Right, just playing behind R&B singers doing the circuit. The sources mention some of the early guys like Clarence Satchel,
Mm-hmm.
Ralph Pee-wee, Middlebrooks on trumpet, Marshall Rock Jones on bass.
The foundation.
Yeah, the core was forming there. And then the material points to this shift in the mid-'60s. That's when they really became the Ohio Players, leaning into that funkier sound, heavy on the horns.
And key people joined around them. Exactly. Sources mention drummer James Diamond Williams coming in, and Walter Junie Morrison on keys. Junie especially seems like he was a huge part of that evolution.
Right, bringing in new textures.
His keyboard work, yeah, and Diamond's drumming really pushed things forward.
So then things get really interesting, based on the sources, when they sign with Westbound Records in the early 70s.
Yeah, Westbound. That's significant because they also had Parliament Funkadelic.
Which tells you something, right? The label was clearly open to, let's say, the unconventional.
Totally. They embraced the weird, the experimental.
And you hear that on those early Westbound albums, Pain, Pleasure, Ecstasy.
72, 73, yeah. The sources describe that sound as gritty, really raw, sensual.
Theatrical, too. Lots of character voices, monologues.
Yeah, creating this whole world. But the thing that maybe stood out even more back then?
The covers.
The covers. Oh, man. Working with Joel Brodsky, the artist.
It's iconic and, yeah, definitely controversial.
Groundbreaking stuff for a black funk band at that time. The material really emphasizes this. Nude models, surreal setups, sometimes kind of bondage themes.
Right. It wasn't just sexy. It was arty and, yeah, a dangerous feeling.
Yeah.
Built this huge mystique. They didn't even have to be on the cover themselves.
Exactly. Like the sources mentioned the chain woman on Pain.
Mm-hmm.
Or the woman covered in honey on honey. Though, a quick correction, the sources prompted honey was actually later on Mercury.
Ah, right. But the idea, the provocative visual style that really cemented itself during the Westbound period.
Definitely. It made them impossible to ignore in a record store.
And musically, during this Westbound time, they had a hit that was just completely left field.
You gotta talk about Funky Worm.
Funky Worm, just bizarre and brilliant, that synth line.
Yeah, the sources really highlight Junie Morrison's ARP synthesizer work on that. That squiggly, weird sound.
Nothing else sounded like it.
Nope. And then you had the granny voice introducing it. Now all y'all done heard the story about the worm?
He was the funkiest worm in the world. It was strange, but man, it hit big. The sources say #1 R&B, top 20 pop. Totally unexpected.
And the crazy thing is how long that track's influence lasted. The sources keep coming back to it being sampled constantly later on, especially in West Coast hip-hop.
G-Funk, yeah. You hear that worm sound woven into so many classic tracks from the 90s. NWA, Ice Cube.
Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Too Short.
Huh.
It became part of the fabric of that sound, all thanks to that quirky Ohio Players hit.
And Junie Morrison based on the material, he sounds like he was the architect of a lot of that early weirdness and innovation.
Definitely the secret weapon, as the sources sort of frame him, bringing in psychedelic sounds, complex harmonies, that theatrical flair.
He wasn't just playing keyboards, he was building these sonic worlds.
But that kind of strong vision, according to the sources, also led to friction.
Creative differences.
Yeah, clashes over direction, and Junie ended up leaving in '74. A big loss creatively, but it also kind of set the stage for their next act.
Which was the move to Mercury Records in '74. And this, the material suggests, is where things really took off commercially.
Big time. The sound got maybe a bit smoother, more polished for radio, perhaps.
It's still funky at its core.
Oh, yeah. They didn't lose the funk. And that first Mercury album, Skin Tight, also '74, that just exploded. Platinum album right out of the gate.
The title track, Skin Tight, so slinky, so cool, it set the tone.
And then later that same year, Fire.
Boom. Just supernova time.
Yeah.
The title track, Fire.
You just hear that siren?
Instantly recognizable. And the sources confirm #1 pop, #1 R&B, huge. The album went platinum, too. It felt like the sound of that moment.
They were unstoppable. And they followed Fire with Honey in '75, another monster album.
Giving us Love Rollercoaster.
Another #1 pop and R&B hit. Just incredible consistency.
And you can't talk about Love Rollercoaster without mentioning the urban legends, right? The sources bring it up.
Oh, yeah, the scream, the story that someone was murdered during the recording.
Which, the material is clear, is totally false. Debunked. Probably just, studio antics or maybe the guitarist Billy Beck screaming or something.
Right. But did that myth help the song? The sources kind of suggest it did. It added to that dark, mysterious vibe they already had.
Absolutely fed into the whole mystique, especially combined with the Honey album cover itself.
Which the sources call maybe their most famous or infamous, the model covered in honey.
So striking. Sensual, artistic, bold. It just screamed Ohio players.
Yeah. And their sound in this Mercury peak period, the material describes it as this amazing blend. Funk, obviously, but also jazz, rock, soul.
Super tight horns.
The wah-wah guitars, lush keys, Billy Beck really stepping up after Junie left.
Seductive lyrics, sometimes pretty out there.
And Diamond Williams just holding it all down with those killer drum grooves.
But it wasn't just the music, was it? The sources stressed the whole package.
The whole aesthetic, the wild outfits on stage.
Theatrical performances.
And always those album covers. They created a visual identity that was just as revolutionary as the sound. You can see echoes of it in artists like Prince later on.
The sources even describe Roy Sugarfoot Bonner, the frontman,
Yeah.
saying he looked like a character out of a blaxploitation movie. Charismatic, visually arresting.
Perfect frontman for that sound and style.
And this era really solidified that classic lineup, according to the material. Diamond Williams, Sugarfoot Bonner, Marshall Jones, Pee Wee Middlebrooks, Marvin Merv Pierce, Satchel, and Billy Beck. That was the powerhouse lineup.
Yeah, the engine room for those huge hits.
So what happened after that peak? The sources mention later Mercury albums like Contradiction in '76.
Right, which had Who'd She Coo, another hit.
Angel in '77. The sound started shifting a bit.
Yeah, Angel is described as maybe smoother, more romantic even. Still funky, but different. And those albums, like Contradiction with that amazing Horsewoman cover, they also hinted, according to the sources, that maybe some cracks were appearing. Internal pressures, friction.
Success can do that.
Definitely. And by the late '70s, the sources say their mainstream chart dominance started to fade.
Why was that?
Well, a mix of things, it seems. The music scene was changing fast, disco was huge, punk, new wave were coming up.
Different sounds taking over?
Exactly. And also internal band stuff, creative disagreements, burnout, the pressure. People started leaving.
They kept going, though, right? On different labels?
Yeah, they had releases on Arista, Boardwalk, like the Mr. Mean soundtrack or an album called Jassé Lady, but the sources note these didn't have the same commercial impact.
Trying to adapt, maybe?
Seems like it. Trying to blend their funk with newer synth sounds, but yeah, the magic wasn't quite the same and the market was crowded.
And tragically, the sources point out the loss of so many key members over the years.
Yeah, that's really sad. Satchel passed in '95, Pee Wee Middlebrooks in '96, then Sugarfoot Bonner in 2013, and Marshall Jones in 2016. Just wow. Foundational members.
Gone too soon.
Yeah.
But their legacy. Wow, it's huge, isn't it? The sources really emphasize that.
Oh, absolutely. We talked about Funky Worm and sampling.
All right, G-Funk wouldn't sound the same without it.
Not at all. NWA, Ice Cube, Too Short. Countless others built tracks on that foundation. It became immortal.
But it's more than just sampling, right? Their overall influence.
For sure. Sources point to artists like Prince, who definitely picked up on their mix of funk, sex appeal, and showmanship. Even bands like Outkast, you can hear echoes.
And their music is still out there.
Yeah.
Radio play, streaming, and there's even a touring version of the band still going, right?
Yeah.
Often led by Diamond Williams.
Yeah, keeping the flame alive. So when you pull it all together from these sources, what do you get? Architects of funk, pioneers of black visual style and sensuality in mainstream music.
A voice for, like, the streets and the bedroom.
Totally. And just a string of undeniable, timeless hits. They really carved out their own unique space.
They weren't just making songs. They were building this whole world, this whole feeling. That mix of raw funk, the bold art, the theater.
Yeah.
It was fearless.
Absolutely fearless.
Yeah.
Which brings us to a final thought, maybe, based on this deep dive. The Ohio players, according to everything we've seen in these sources, they really stand out. Merging that raw funk with art, with sex appeal, with this incredible confidence. Groundbreaking then and still influential now.
So here's something to chew on, thinking about all this material. In today's world, where maybe things feel a bit more polished, more calculated sometimes, what is the Ohio players' approach, that unfiltered mix of gritty music and really provocative, bold art? Tell us about, I don't know, the power of just being authentic, of pushing boundaries.
Yeah, why does that specific combination, the sound and the visual challenge, still feel so potent? Why does it still resonate today?
Something to think about.
Definitely. And honestly, based on this dive into the sources, if you haven't already, you should really go explore their music. Check out those albums, listen to the hits again, and yeah, look up those covers online. You got to see the whole picture to really get the Ohio players.
It's quite a ride.